The year was 1883. The painting, a portrait of a prominent figure, a wealthy merchant named Arthur Penhaligon, seemed to hum with the quiet dignity of its era. It showed Penhaligon in his richly appointed study, surrounded by leather-bound books and dark, polished wood. His expression was calm, almost serene, a man at peace with his station and his world. This was the initial impression, at least. The portrait exuded an air of peace, a tranquility that spoke of a bygone age where fortunes were made and lives were lived with a certain measured grace. It was a masterpiece of late 19th century portraiture, fitting perfectly within the artistic conventions of the time. Artists then aimed for realism, for capturing not just a likeness, but the essence of their subject's character and social standing. This painting did just that, or so everyone believed. It eventually found its way into the permanent collection of the prestigious Blackwood Museum, acquired after a lengthy negotiation with the Penhaligon estate. Its historical and artistic value were immediately recognized. It was seen as a prime example of period art, a window into the lives of the Victorian elite. For decades, it hung in a quiet gallery, admired by scholars and casual visitors alike, its story seemingly complete and uncomplicated. A large window dominated the background of the portrait. It was a detail often noted but rarely lingered upon. It provided a soft, natural light that bathed Penhaligon's study, a common stylistic choice to add depth and realism to interior scenes. No one ever thought twice about it. It was just a window, a source of light, a background element. Early scholarly analyses of the painting focused on the usual things: the artist's brushwork, the symbolism of the objects in the study, the socio-economic context of Penhaligon's life. Papers were written, lectures given, all without a single mention of anything unusual. The painting was a textbook example of its genre, yet a subtle, almost subconscious feeling of unease occasionally rippled through some who stood before it for extended periods. A curator once mentioned a fleeting sense that something was off, but dismissed it as museum fatigue. Another visitor reported a slight chill, even on a warm day, when staring at the window. Nothing concrete, just whispers of intuition that were quickly forgotten. This quiet existence was about to change. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a meticulous art historian known for her sharp eye and even sharper intellect, was tasked with a new, in-depth evaluation of the Penhaligon portrait. The museum was planning a major exhibition on Victorian domestic life, and the portrait was to be a centerpiece. Eleanor approached the task with her usual rigor, excited by the opportunity to delve deeper into a seemingly straightforward piece. The preparation for the exhibition involved a thorough cleaning and minor restoration work. The painting was carefully taken down, its old frame removed, and conservators meticulously worked to remove layers of grime and old varnish. This was followed by detailed photographic documentation. Every square inch of the canvas was captured with high-resolution cameras, a routine procedure to record its current state and aid in future research. This process included creating ultra-high-resolution digital copies of the artwork, allowing for unprecedented levels of magnification. Eleanor began her review of these digital files in her quiet office, a cup of lukewarm tea beside her. She started with the edges, moved to the subject's face, then the intricate details of the books and furniture. She was looking for tiny details that might have been missed, a signature, a hidden symbol, anything that could add to the painting's known history. She expected to find nothing out of the ordinary, just confirmation of what was already known. The initial hours were precisely that, a meticulous but uneventful journey across a familiar canvas. She zoomed in on Penhaligon's waistcoat, admiring the artist's skill in rendering the fine fabric. She studied the titles on the spines of the books, identifying a few obscure philosophical texts. Everything was as it should be, peaceful and predictable, a perfect representation of a historical moment captured in oil. Eleanor continued her diligent review, her eyes scanning the digital canvas. Her cursor moved slowly, systematically across the image. She had just finished examining the intricate patterns on the Persian rug in the foreground, when her attention drifted towards the large window in the background. It was a detail she had always found a bit bland, a simple rectangle of light and blurred green, meant to suggest a garden or perhaps a quiet street beyond. She decided to zoom in on it, just to complete her thorough examination, perhaps to see if the artist had painted any subtle details in the glass itself, a trick of light or a faint imperfection. As the image on her screen expanded, the window filled her view. The indistinct green outside resolved into what seemed like blurry foliage and a hint of a distant building. Then she noticed it. Right in the center of the reflection, a shape. It wasn't immediately clear what it was. Her first thought was a smudge on the digital file, or perhaps a minor flaw in the original pane of glass, that the artist had faithfully reproduced. It was distorted, yes, but also strangely compelling. She knew historical windows often had ripples and imperfections that could warp reflections, so she wasn't immediately alarmed. She clicked the zoom button again, then again, pushing the resolution to its absolute limit. The blurry shape began to sharpen, and with each pixel that resolved, a cold knot began to form in her stomach. It was definitely a figure, human, or at least human-like, but it was wrong, terribly wrong. The proportions were off, stretched and twisted in a way that defied natural optics, even through old glass. It was tall and thin, almost skeletal, with limbs that seemed too long. The head was indistinct, like a shadow, but it faced directly towards the viewer, towards her, towards the room, towards Mr. Penhaligon. Her initial academic curiosity evaporated, replaced by a jolt of pure, primal unease. This was not a trick of light. This was not a flaw in the glass. This was something deliberate, something painted with intent. She cross-referenced the image with historical photographs of the building's exterior from that period. The museum had an extensive archive, including detailed street views from the 1880s. She pulled up the relevant images, quickly comparing the reflected scene with what should have been outside. The architecture, the street layout, the trees, nothing in the reflection matched the known reality of the building's surroundings. The figure was not a distorted passerby, nor a gardener tending to a bush. It was an anomaly. The reflected figure stood out against the blurry background, a dark, elongated silhouette. Its posture was stiff, almost rigid, as if frozen in place. There were no clear facial features, just a dark void where a face should be. Yet Eleanor felt an undeniable sense of being watched. The arms, if they were arms, hung strangely by its sides, or perhaps they were reaching, she couldn't tell. The overall impression was one of profound wrongness, a detail that screamed out of the serene portrait like a silent scream. It wasn't just distorted, it was menacing, it was looking in. Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in her office. Her initial academic calm had completely shattered. This wasn't merely an interesting discovery, it was deeply unsettling. The peaceful portrait now seemed to mock her, its tranquility a thin veil over something sinister. The figure in the reflection felt like a stain, a dark mark on the canvas that she could not unsee. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen, trying to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation. But none came. Knowing she couldn't keep this to herself, and needing a second pair of eyes, she called Dr. Alistair Finch. Alistair was a senior colleague, a renowned specialist in art forgery, conservation, and historical anomalies. If anyone could either debunk her discovery or confirm her fears, it was him. He arrived a few minutes later, a perpetually rumpled tweed jacket over his usual button-down shirt. "What's got you looking like you've seen a ghost, Eleanor?" he asked, a slight smile on his face before noticing the intense, almost frantic look in her eyes. "Just look at this, Alistair," she said, gesturing to the screen. Her voice was tighter than she intended. He leaned over her shoulder, peering at the magnified reflection in the window. "A bit blurry, isn't it? Old glass, I imagine. Or perhaps a gardener caught mid-motion." His tone was dismissive, exactly what she had expected. Alistair was a pragmatist, grounded in verifiable facts. "Zoom in further," Eleanor urged, her finger hovering over the mouse. He did. As the figure sharpened, Alistair's jovial expression slowly faded, his brow furrowed. He leaned closer, his nose almost touching the screen. The smile was gone. He was silent for a long moment, his usual quick wit replaced by a quiet intensity. He meticulously examined the details, the impossible proportions, the dark, empty space where a face should be. He compared it to the historical street views she had open in another window. That's not right," Alistair finally murmured, his voice low, a hint of genuine alarm in it. "That's not a distortion. That's painted." He straightened up, running a hand through his already messy hair. "And it's not reflecting anything that was actually there." His initial skepticism had given way to genuine shock. They spent the next few hours together, meticulously re-examining the digital files, cross-referencing with every available historical document. They researched other portraits from the era, looking for similar unexplained reflections, symbolic figures, or deliberate hidden details. They found none. The artistic conventions of the time simply didn't include such unsettling, distorted figures in background reflections, certainly not without clear symbolic context or explanation. This was unique and uniquely disturbing. For Eleanor, the painting was no longer the serene historical artifact it had been just hours before. It had transformed. It now radiated an unsettling, almost malevolent presence. The elegant study, the dignified Mr. Penhaligon, all seemed tainted by the silent, watching figure in the window. The portrait, once a source of academic pleasure, had become a source of profound dread. The figure in the reflection seemed to be looking directly at her, not just at the room, but through the canvas, through time, into her very soul. She felt a cold dread settle deep within her, a feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more disturbing than a simple anomaly. Eleanor and Alistair, now bound by this unsettling discovery, knew they had to dig deeper. The reflection wasn't just a trick of light or an artist's whim, it felt like a deliberate hidden message. Their next step was to deepen their understanding of the historical context surrounding the painting. They decided to look into the building depicted, the surrounding area in 1883, and especially the life of the portrait's subject, Mr. Penhaligon. They spent days poring over old city maps, property deeds, and local archives. The building, a grand Victorian townhouse, had a long and somewhat unremarkable history of ownership by prominent local families. However, as they delved into more obscure local records, they began to unearth whispers. Old newspaper clippings from the late 19th century sometimes mentioned strange occurrences in that particular district. There were reports of petty thefts that never quite added up, disappearances of servants and delivery people, and even an unsolved murder case from 1885, 2 years after the painting was completed, that happened just a few blocks away. The details were vague, often dismissed as urban legends or common crime, but taken together, they painted a picture of a neighborhood with a darker undercurrent than its respectable facade suggested. Their investigation into Mr. Penhaligon, the dignified subject of the portrait, also started to reveal cracks in his polished image. Initial biographies painted him as a successful merchant and philanthropist, but digging into less formal sources like personal letters and social diaries from the period, they found hints of a different man. There were mentions of his reclusiveness, his peculiar habits, and a certain coldness in his dealings. One diary entry from a contemporary socialite described him as a man of great wealth, but with eyes that hold no warmth, a soul perhaps too keen on shadows. Another alluded to his unusual tastes and the rapid turnover of staff at his residence. These were not outright accusations, but they were certainly more than just eccentricity. They suggested a person who preferred to operate outside the bright scrutiny of society, perhaps for good reason. Next, they turned their attention to the artist, a man named Thomas Barlow. His name was not widely known in art history circles. Their research quickly revealed why. Barlow had a brief, somewhat troubled career. He had shown initial promise, but his style was considered a bit too dark, too realistic for the prevailing tastes of the time, which favored more idealized depictions. Records showed he had completed a handful of portraits before the one of Mr. Penhaligon. After that, his name simply vanished from the art world. There were no further commissions, no exhibition entries, no death records that seemed to fit. It was as if he had painted the portrait of Mr. Penhaligon and then simply disappeared or met an early, unexplained end. This added another layer of profound mystery to the whole affair. Why would an artist, still relatively young, just cease to exist in the public record? They meticulously examined the building's blueprints from the period, trying to match them against the painting. The window in the portrait was large, a common feature of Victorian homes. However, a detailed comparison revealed a subtle discrepancy. The angle of the light, the specific arrangement of the panes, and even the slight curve of the glass in the reflection didn't quite align with the architectural drawings of Mr. Penhaligon's house. It was a minor detail, easily overlooked, but it suggested that the artist had taken liberties, or perhaps was depicting something more than just a literal window. This brought them back to the core question. What was the nature of the reflection? Was it a deliberate artistic choice, a symbolic element meant to convey some deeper meaning about Mr. Penhaligon? Or was it something far more literal and sinister, a depiction of something the artist actually saw? Alistair leaned towards the deliberate choice, perhaps a commentary on the subject's hidden nature. Eleanor, however, felt a growing conviction that it was something else entirely. The sheer unsettling quality of the figure, its distorted form, felt too raw, too visceral to be mere symbolism. As Eleanor continued to immerse herself in the mystery, the psychological impact began to take its toll. The painting, once an object of detached academic study, started to invade her personal life. She found herself having vivid nightmares, always centered on the distorted figure in the window, its empty gaze fixed on her. She felt an inexplicable coldness in the research room where the painting was temporarily stored, even when the heating was on full. Sometimes she would glance up from her notes and feel an intense, fleeting sensation of being watched, a shiver running down her spine. The line between her professional work and her personal well-being began to blur. Alistair, meanwhile, explored the possibility of the artist intentionally embedding a hidden message or warning within the reflection. He theorized that perhaps Barlow, for reasons unknown, wanted to expose something about Mr. Penhaligon but couldn't do so directly. The painting, then, would be his silent confession, a cry for help or a warning to future generations who might scrutinize his work closely enough. It was a plausible theory, aligning with some historical instances of artists subtly embedding political or social commentary into their work. But for Eleanor, the reflected figure now felt less like a mere distortion or a symbolic message, and more like a conscious entity. It was an unseen observer, watching from outside the frame of reality, a silent witness to something terrible. The more she looked at it, the more alive it seemed, not in a physical sense, but in the way it permeated her thoughts and emotions. The academic pursuit had become something deeply personal, almost primal. Her escalating personal fear was undeniable. The unsettling image began to haunt her waking thoughts. She'd be in the grocery store or walking home, and a fleeting shadow, a strange angle of light, would momentarily conjure the distorted face in her mind. The painting wasn't just a piece of art anymore, it was a presence. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they were only scratching the surface of its dark secret. This was more than just art history. It was an entanglement with a past that refused to stay buried. The mounting dread led Eleanor and Alistair to intensify their search for anything that could shed light on the artist, a man named Thomas Barlow. Their efforts eventually led them to a dusty, forgotten corner of a regional historical society archive, far from any major city. Tucked away in a box labeled Miscellaneous Donations, 1920s, they found a small, leather-bound journal and a handful of crumpled letters. Barlow's name was faintly inscribed on the cover of the journal. It felt like finding a needle in a haystack, a stroke of luck that seemed almost too convenient given the chilling nature of their investigation. The early entries in the journal were perfectly normal, almost mundane. Barlow wrote about the struggle of an aspiring artist in late 19th century London, the difficulty of securing commissions, the endless pursuit of patrons. He detailed his daily routines, his frustrations with his technique, and his aspirations for recognition. There were sketches of street scenes, quick studies of human figures, and notes on color theory. He mentioned various commissions, some successful, others less so, providing a clear picture of a dedicated, if somewhat struggling, artist. These initial pages offered a comforting sense of normalcy, a stark contrast to the unsettling mystery surrounding the Penhaligon portrait. However, as Eleanor and Alistair delved deeper into the journal, the tone began to shift. Subsequent entries revealed a growing uneasiness and an almost obsessive focus on the specific portrait commission of Mr. Penhaligon. Barlow described the initial meeting with the wealthy merchant, noting his subject's polite but reserved demeanor. He wrote about the grandeur of Penhaligon's study, the rich textures, and the challenge of capturing the stern yet distinguished presence of the man. But slowly, subtly, a thread of discomfort started to weave through his words. He began to describe a strange atmosphere in the house, a quietness that felt heavy, a feeling of being watched even when alone. The journal entries started to include cryptic references that hinted at something unseen. Barlow wrote about shadows that danced when no flame flickered, presences that lingered just beyond sight, and what lies beyond the glass. He described feeling increasingly agitated and paranoid during his sittings at Penhaligon's house. His handwriting became more erratic, the sentences shorter, more fragmented, reflecting a mind under increasing strain. He often added small, frantic sketches in the margins, abstract shapes that hinted at distortion and unease, but never coalescing into anything recognizable. One recurring theme in the journal was Barlow's struggle with depicting the window reflection. He initially wrote about trying to render it accurately, capturing the street outside, the distant buildings, the movement of clouds. But he repeatedly failed. He would sketch it, paint it, erase it, only to find himself unable to produce a conventional reflection. He felt an inexplicable compulsion to render something else, something that his eyes saw but his mind struggled to process. He described it as a pull, a force that guided his hand away from reality. He tried to rationalize it, blaming fatigue or artistic block, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each brushstroke directed at the window. Then came the chilling confession. In a series of increasingly frantic entries, Barlow described seeing something in the reflection that wasn't there in reality. He called it a vision, a specter, a grotesque shadow. He wrote that it appeared slowly, gradually in the glass, first as a smudge, then as a form, and finally as a distorted human-like figure looking directly at him from outside the window. He described its features as indistinct yet terrifying, its gaze fixed and unsettling. He felt compelled to paint what he saw, believing it to be a warning, a truth that needed to be preserved, even if it defied logic. He confessed his fear of Mr. Penhaligon, not just as a patron, but as someone connected to this horrifying apparition. He wrote of a desperate attempt to warn future viewers, embedding this truth into the painting itself. The journal entries conveyed the artist's growing fear, not only of the distorted figure in the reflection, but also of Mr. Penhaligon and the oppressive atmosphere of his house. Barlow hinted at a dark secret, something Penhaligon was involved in, something that manifested in the reflection. He expressed a profound sense of entrapment, feeling that he had stumbled upon something terrible and was now unable to escape its gravity. He wrote about his desire to flee, to abandon the commission, but also a strange, morbid fascination that held him captive. The last few pages were filled with desperate pleas and fragmented thoughts about escaping a darkness. The journal abruptly ended mid-sentence, the final words a jumbled, illegible scrawl. There was no explanation, no farewell, just an abrupt silence. This sudden cessation of writing reinforced the earlier discovery of Barlow's premature or unexplained disappearance, adding a tragic weight to his words. His fate remained ambiguous, a chilling, blank space in the historical record. This discovery provided Eleanor and Alistair with a crucial, albeit terrifying, understanding of the reflection's true nature. It was not an accident, not a trick of light, and not mere symbolism. It was intentional. Barlow had deliberately, and under duress, painted what he saw, a horrifying truth that transcended the canvas. The journal was his desperate, silent scream across time. The weight of this revelation profoundly impacted Eleanor. The knowledge that a terrified artist had deliberately embedded such a horror into the painting transformed her artistic analysis into a chilling historical investigation. The academic distance she once held was completely gone. She was no longer just studying a painting. She was unraveling a confession, a warning from a man who had seen too much. The painting was not just art. It was a testament, a final act of courage or desperation, a silent scream frozen in time. The reflection was no longer just an anomaly. It was a ghost. With the artist's journal laid bare, its frantic pages whispering secrets from the grave, Eleanor and Alistair found themselves forced to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about the portrait's subject, Mr. Penhaligon. He was no longer just a wealthy, respected figure from the past, but a man seen through the terrified eyes of the artist, Barlow, a man whose presence had brought forth a grotesque vision in a window reflection. The serene facade of the portrait crumbled, revealing a sinister light that had always been there, just hidden beneath layers of time and artistic convention. Their research shifted focus from the artist's torment to Penhaligon's life, digging deeper than before. They scoured local archives, dusty newspaper clippings from the 1880s, forgotten court records, and even obscure family histories of the prominent families in the area. What they began to uncover was a dark undercurrent beneath Penhaligon's polished public image. There were whispers of business dealings that skirted the edge of legality, sudden disappearances of rivals, and a surprising number of unfortunate accidents that seemed to benefit his growing wealth and influence. No direct accusations were ever made. No convictions, but a pattern of convenient misfortune for anyone who stood in his way started to emerge. These were not the actions of a benevolent gentleman, but of someone ruthless and calculating, capable of silencing dissent and erasing inconvenient truths. The house itself, the very setting of the portrait, also began to reveal its own grim history. They found old property deeds and anecdotal accounts suggesting a surprisingly high turnover of domestic staff in Penhaligon's employ. Servants would be hired and then simply vanish, their families told they had moved on to other opportunities, or perhaps taken ill and returned to distant relatives. There were no official reports of foul play, no bodies discovered, but the sheer number of unexplained departures was unsettling. Local gossip, long forgotten, spoke of a pervasive sense of dread that hung over the property, a coldness that seeped into the bones even on the warmest days. Subsequent inhabitants, after Penhaligon's time, often reported strange noises, fleeting shadows, and an inexplicable feeling of being watched, leading many to sell the house quickly, unable to tolerate its oppressive atmosphere. The house wasn't just a backdrop, it was a silent witness, a container of past horrors. As the layers of Penhaligon's life peeled back, the nature of the reflected figure in the painting took on new, terrifying significance. It could no longer be dismissed as a mere artistic flourish or a figment of Barlow's imagination. Theories began to form in Eleanor's mind, each more chilling than the last. Was it a victim of Penhaligon's dark deeds, a spectral presence forever bound to the place where they met their end? Was it a manifestation of Penhaligon's own deep-seated guilt, a visual representation of the evil he had wrought, a psychological projection made real by Barlow's sensitive artistic mind? Or was it something even more supernatural, an entity drawn to the malevolence emanating from the man and his house, an unholy guardian of his secrets? The journal entries, with their fragmented descriptions of a spectre and a grotesque shadow, lent credence to all these terrifying possibilities. The artist's journal also implied a deeper, perhaps unwilling connection to the subject's dark secrets. Barlow's fear wasn't just of an apparition, it was of Penhaligon himself and what he represented. It suggested that the artist was either an unwitting witness to some of Penhaligon's atrocities, or perhaps even a victim of his psychological influence, forced to confront the hidden darkness. The journal entries about feeling trapped, about being unable to escape the gravity of the situation, painted a picture of a man ensnared, his artistic talent exploited to document a horror he couldn't speak of directly. He wasn't just painting a portrait, he was painting a confession on behalf of the silent dead. Their investigation into Penhaligon's social standing revealed the extent of his power and influence in 19th-century society. He was a pillar of the community, a man whose word carried weight, whose connections ran deep. This status allowed him to conceal his actions with disturbing ease, to manipulate local authorities, and to ensure that any suspicions were quickly dismissed. He was a master of appearances, maintaining a veneer of respectability that made it impossible for anyone to openly challenge him. The reflected figure in the window, therefore, became an even more potent symbol, the silent testament to the crimes he had so effectively hidden from public view. Eleanor, initially driven by academic curiosity, found her pursuit transforming into a personal crusade. The more she uncovered, the more she felt a profound empathy for Barlow, the terrified artist, and for the unnamed victims whose stories had been erased by Penhaligon's power. Her desire to expose the truth became an almost obsessive need, a moral imperative that burned within her. She felt a responsibility to give voice to the silent screams captured in the reflection, to bring justice, however belated, to those who had suffered. Alistair, while equally disturbed by their discoveries, urged caution. He saw Eleanor's growing obsession, the way the dark history was starting to consume her. He reminded her of the potential dangers of delving too deeply into such a dark past, not just professionally, but personally. Eleanor, he'd said, his voice laced with concern, we are historians, not avengers. This information is powerful, but it can also be destructive. Be careful not to let it destroy you. He feared for her sanity, for the toll this relentless exposure to evil was taking on her. The idea that the painting itself was a kind of trap, a vessel for something malevolent, began to take hold in Eleanor's mind. It wasn't just a canvas and oil, it felt alive, imbued with the suffering of the past, a silent entity waiting to reveal its secrets. The reflection wasn't just an image, it was a window not into the outside world, but into a realm of forgotten terror. The combined evidence, the artist's confession, the house's grim history, the subject's hidden atrocities, all pointed to a horrifying conclusion. Mr. Penhaligon was not just a man, he was a monster, and the reflected figure in the window was the silent, eternal testament to his crimes, a chilling accusation frozen in time, waiting for someone to finally understand its unspeakable truth. The painting, now understood as a chilling historical document rather than a mere piece of art, began to exert a strange, almost physical influence on its surroundings within the museum's secure storage facility. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed as coincidence or the overactive imaginations of those now privy to its dark secrets. Yet a pattern emerged. Minor technical glitches became more frequent around the specific climate-controlled chamber where the portrait was kept. The automated lighting system would occasionally flicker, sometimes dimming to an unsettling glow before returning to normal. Security cameras, usually reliable, would inexplicably cut out for brief moments, leaving gaps in the surveillance footage of that particular section. Museum staff, those who weren't aware of Eleanor and Alistair's findings, started to report strange occurrences. Janitors on their night rounds spoke of inexplicable cold spots that would appear in the corridor leading to the chamber, even with the building's robust heating system. A few mentioned faint, almost inaudible whispers, like distant sighs carried on a non-existent breeze that seemed to emanate from behind the heavy, insulated door. Most commonly, there was a pervasive feeling of unease, a sense of being watched, that settled over anyone who spent more than a few minutes near the chamber. They couldn't explain it, but they learned to hurry when passing by, their steps quickening, their gazes averted. Eleanor, however, was experiencing a far more profound deterioration. The relentless pursuit of Penhaligon's truth, coupled with the painting's eerie influence, was taking a severe toll on her mental and physical well-being. Sleep became a luxury she rarely afforded herself, haunted by vivid nightmares that replayed the artist's terror or depicted the distorted figure in the reflection reaching out. She grew jumpy, startled by sudden noises, her nerves frayed and exposed. Her once meticulous appearance gave way to disheveled hair and tired eyes. She stopped eating regularly, lost weight, and became increasingly isolated, her conversations revolving solely around the painting, the reflection, and the looming exhibition. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a lonely outpost from which she waged a solitary war against a century-old evil. Alistair watched her decline with growing alarm. He tried to persuade her to step back, to take a break, to allow him to handle the final preparations for the exhibition. "Eleanor, you're burning out," he pleaded one afternoon, finding her hunched over her desk, surrounded by stacks of research. her eyes red-rimmed. "This isn't healthy. The truth will still be there if you rest." He feared for her sanity, for the way the darkness of the past seemed to be seeping into her present, threatening to consume her. But Eleanor was unyielding, convinced that only she could see this through, that she owed it to Barlow and Penhaligon's victims. Then came the most unsettling development. While meticulously reviewing the ultra-high-resolution digital images of the painting, Eleanor believed she detected subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the reflected figure's posture or expression over time. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic movement, but a fractional change, a slight tilt of the head, a barely perceptible shift in the angle of the shoulders, a deepening of the shadowed distortion that hinted at a malevolent smirk. She spent hours cross-referencing different scans taken weeks apart, using specialized software to highlight minute differences. Alistair, initially skeptical, couldn't entirely dismiss her findings. The changes were so slight, so ambiguous, that they could be an optical illusion, a trick of the light, or even a digital artifact. But Eleanor was convinced. "It's moving, Alistair," she whispered, her voice strained. "It's watching us. It knows we're getting closer." The painting seemed to actively exert a psychological grip on Eleanor, drawing her deeper into its mystery and its horror. It wasn't just an object of study anymore. It felt like a living entity, a sentient malevolence that communicated directly with her, feeding her obsession, eroding her defenses. The boundary between art and reality began to blur for her. She started to question the very nature of what she was studying, wondering if the painting was merely a depiction of a past horror, or if it was, in fact, a doorway, a thin veil separating their world from something ancient and terrifying that had been trapped within its canvas. The reflected figure was no longer just a detail. It was an active participant, an unseen observer whose gaze she felt constantly. Despite the growing dread, the strange phenomena, and her own deteriorating health, Eleanor became even more determined to publicly expose the painting's secret. She believed it was the only way to break its hold, to release the artist's tormented spirit, and to finally bring closure, however symbolic, to the victims. The exhibition, once a professional milestone, was now a battleground, a chance to reclaim the narrative from Penhaligon's sinister legacy. The impending exhibition date loomed large, adding a suffocating sense of urgency and dread. The painting, with its hidden horror, was about to be revealed to the public. Eleanor knew that once it was out in the open, once its secret was proclaimed, there would be no going back. The stakes were impossibly high, not just for her career, but for her sanity, and perhaps for something far more profound and dangerous that she couldn't yet fully grasp. She felt the weight of history, the silent pleas of the dead, and the chilling presence of the reflected figure pressing down on her, urging her forward towards the inevitable reckoning. The day of the exhibition arrived with a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, but inside the museum, a different kind of tension vibrated through the air. Public anticipation was high, fueled by months of careful marketing around the rediscovered masterpiece. For Eleanor, however, it was an internal dread, a cold knot in her stomach that had been tightening for weeks. She moved through the preparations almost like a ghost, her movements precise but detached, her mind a whirlwind of facts, theories, and the chilling image of the reflection. Every staff member she passed seemed to carry a piece of her anxiety, a subtle shift in their demeanor, a nervous glance towards the main gallery where the painting now hung, bathed in carefully calibrated light. Eleanor stood before the podium, the microphone feeling strangely cold against her fingertips. This was it, the moment she had worked towards, obsessed over, and perhaps even feared. She was scheduled to give the keynote presentation, a detailed analysis of the portrait and its historical significance. But her script held a secret, a departure from the usual academic discourse. She intended to reveal the truth, to pull back the veil on the reflection and the dark history it represented. The air in the auditorium, already thick with the scent of old paper and polished wood, seemed to grow heavier. A subtle chill snaked through the room, despite the controlled climate. Lights flickered momentarily in the back, drawing a few murmurs from the early arrivals, but quickly stabilized. An oppressive silence, not the respectful quiet of an audience, but something deeper, more profound, seemed to fall over the hall. It felt like the painting itself was holding its breath. As the first guests began to filter in, their initial reactions to the painting were diverse. Many were immediately captivated by its undeniable beauty, the rich detail of the subject's attire, the masterful brushstrokes that brought the 19th century study to life. They admired the serene composure of the merchant, the quality of the light, the subtle play of shadows. Yet others, perhaps more sensitive or simply more perceptive, felt an inexplicable chill. They would pause, a slight frown creasing their brow, their gaze lingering on the window, even before Eleanor had spoken a word. A few shivered, attributing it to a draft, but the feeling was distinct, a prickling unease that had nothing to do with temperature. Eleanor watched them, a grim satisfaction mingling with her fear. They were feeling it. The painting was beginning its work. The auditorium filled, and Eleanor took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady, though a tremor ran through her internally. "Tonight we celebrate a remarkable piece of art, a window into the prosperity and artistic skill of 1883. She started with the conventional narrative, describing the subject, the artist, the initial acquisition. Her words flowed smoothly, building the context, establishing the painting's initial serenity. The audience listened intently, nodding along, appreciating the academic rigor, but Eleanor could feel the shift, the growing anticipation in the room as she began to steer the narrative towards the less conventional. She spoke of the high-resolution scans, the meticulous process of preservation, and then she paused, letting the silence hang. "It was during this detailed examination," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, "that we made a discovery, a detail hidden in plain sight, within the reflection of the window." A murmur rippled through the audience. Curiosity, not yet fear, was the dominant emotion. On the large screen behind her, the high-resolution digital image of the painting appeared. Eleanor used a laser pointer, guiding the audience's gaze to the window, then to the reflection. "Initially," she explained, "we believed it to be a distortion, a trick of the light, perhaps even a minor imperfection in the glass itself." She clicked a button, and the image zoomed in, focusing solely on the distorted figure. The blurry shape sharpened, resolving into the grotesque, almost featureless human form they had seen in the lab. The oppressive silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the silence of shock, of dawning horror. A wave of murmurs, then gasps, swept through the audience. Someone in the front row let out a small, choked sound. The horror of the reflection, stark and undeniable on the massive screen, was now clearly visible to everyone. Eleanor felt a strange surge of power, a validation of her relentless pursuit, but then, as if in response to the collective gasp, the painting itself seemed to react. The lights in the auditorium flickered again, more intensely this time, plunging the room into momentary darkness before snapping back on. A distinct audible creak echoed from the main gallery, where the actual painting hung, a sound like old wood groaning under immense pressure. On the screen, for a fleeting, terrifying instant, the reflected image seemed to shimmer, almost to move, the distorted face twisting into something even more unsettling before settling back into its static horror. Eleanor felt a direct, terrifying connection to the reflected figure. It wasn't just an image on a screen, it was a presence, an entity that had been dormant, now fully awake and aware of being exposed. She felt its gaze upon her, cold and ancient, a sensation that pierced through her carefully constructed composure. Her breath hitched. She fought the urge to look over her shoulder, to confirm that the real painting wasn't somehow manifesting the same subtle, malevolent shift. She knew it was her own mind playing tricks, a culmination of her fear, but the feeling was overwhelmingly real, even after the initial shock subsided. After Eleanor continued her presentation, calmly detailing the artist's journal, Barlow's sinister past, and Penhaligon's victims, a profound sense of unease settled over the exhibition hall. The painting was no longer just art, it was a chilling testament to a buried horror, a silent scream frozen in time. The audience, now fully aware of the dark truth, looked at the portrait with new eyes, seeing not just the elegant merchant, but the shadow of his crimes, the silent witness in the window. The air remained heavy, charged with the revelation. The exhibition had begun, but it was clear to Eleanor that the reckoning had only just started. The painting had unveiled its secret, and now it was watching. The public's reaction to Eleanor's revelation was a strange mix of fascination, horror, and a touch of skepticism. News of the cursed painting and its chilling reflections spread like wildfire. Art critics debated the ethical implications of displaying such a piece, while historians scrambled to verify Eleanor and Alistair's findings. Some dismissed it as a clever publicity stunt, a modern interpretation superimposed onto an old masterpiece. Others, especially those who had attended the presentation and seen the undeniable evidence, were deeply disturbed. The museum was inundated with visitors, all eager to witness the infamous portrait for themselves. It became a sensation, drawing crowds far larger than any typical exhibition. The portrait, once a serene historical artifact, was now forever marked. It wasn't just a painting of a wealthy merchant anymore. It was a chilling relic, a vessel of forgotten horror. Its new identity transformed it from a piece of art into a haunting monument, a silent scream frozen in time. People stared at the window reflection with a morbid curiosity, trying to discern the distorted features, to feel the cold presence Eleanor had described. The painting had unveiled its secret, and in doing so, it had changed irrevocably. Eleanor, though deeply scarred by the relentless pressure and the terrifying discoveries, emerged from the ordeal as a figure of quiet authority. Her initial academic pursuit had transformed into a personal crusade, and she had faced a profound darkness. The sleepless nights, the unsettling phenomena, and the constant feeling of being watched had taken their toll, leaving her with a permanent tremor in her hands and a haunted look in her eyes. Yet, she had persevered. She had brought truth to light, exposing the hidden atrocities of a powerful man and giving voice to the artist's desperate warning. She became a respected, if somewhat enigmatic, voice in the art world, known for her courage and her unwavering commitment to uncovering the full story behind the canvas. Alistair, true to his nature, remained a steadfast presence. He continued to support Eleanor, meticulously cross-referencing every detail, confirming the validity of her findings and defending her against the inevitable critics who tried to discredit her. He acknowledged the immense courage it had taken for her to reveal such a disturbing truth, especially when it challenged established norms and ventured into territory most academics preferred to avoid. Their professional partnership had deepened into a bond forged in the crucible of shared terror and discovery. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the ultimate nature of the reflected figure remained a haunting mystery. Was it a victim of Barlow, eternally trapped, seeking justice? Was it a spectral manifestation of Barlow's own guilt, a monstrous reflection of his inner darkness? Or was it something else entirely, something beyond human comprehension, a symbolic representation of pure evil? The debates raged on, with no definitive answers. The painting offered a glimpse into a forgotten terror, but it refused to fully explain itself. Its ambiguity was part of its enduring power, its ability to unsettle and provoke thought. The painting remained on display, but not in the main gallery. It was moved to a specially curated exhibit, a dimly lit room with only the portrait and comprehensive historical data. It was always under strict supervision, its presence a constant reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath a polished surface. Visitors approached it with a mixture of awe and trepidation, drawn by its story, repelled by its unsettling truth. It was no longer just an artwork. It was a monument to human depravity and an artist's desperate, chilling message. The artist's legacy, once obscure and ending in an unexplained disappearance, was re-evaluated. Their work was now seen as a courageous, albeit terrifying, act of truth-telling. The journal entries, once dismissed as the ramblings of a troubled mind, were now studied as a vital historical document, a testament to an artist's moral struggle against a powerful, sinister patron. The artist had not just painted a portrait, they had painted a warning, a confession, a silent cry from the past. The story concluded with the unsettling realization that some horrors are not confined to the past. They can manifest in unexpected ways, even through the medium of art, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover them. The painting served as a constant reminder that history is not always neat and tidy, and that even the most beautiful objects can hide the darkest secrets. A final, lingering description of the painting and its reflection haunted all who saw it. The elegant merchant, forever depicted in his study, sat oblivious to the silent, distorted figure in the window behind him. That figure, a vague shape with an unreadable face, remained a constant, silent presence, forever watching, forever a window into a forgotten terror. Its gaze, though unseen, was felt by all, a chilling echo that resonated through the quiet halls of the museum, a reminder that some stories once told can never truly be unheard. The painting, an eternal sentinel, continued its vigil, its secret now revealed, its horror eternally present,